You'll never truly understand what's going on in someone else's mind, until you confront the noise echoing in your own. We spend our lives trying to read others, decode emotions, interpret behaviors. But have you ever wondered, are you really seeing them clearly? Or just seeing reflections of your own inner chaos? Real clarity doesn't come from clever analysis. It begins in silence, the kind of silence Stoic philosophers trained for. A silence so deep, your ego steps aside, and your awareness becomes razor sharp. Before you can ever truly grasp what's going on inside someone else, you need to turn inward and face the noise within your own mind. And no, this isn't some motivational catchphrase. This is the hard truth. Your racing thoughts, your emotional triggers, your need to be right, to be liked, to feel secure, these don't just shape how you feel. They completely shape how you see. When your inner world is unsettled, you're not observing others clearly. You're viewing them through a fog, a distorted lens built from your own fears, doubts, and unresolved emotions. That's not understanding people. That's misunderstanding yourself. You're not reading their behavior. You're reading your own insecurity reflected in them. The real art of understanding people doesn't start with mind games, clever questions, or psychological tactics. It begins with stillness. The kind of stillness the Stoics devoted their lives to. Where the ego goes quiet. Where your mind becomes as still as glassy water. And in that still water, a reflection appears. Not just their words, but their meaning. Not just their actions, but their burdens. And suddenly, without force or effort, you see them, not for who you want them to be, but for who they truly are. But here's the problem. The world doesn't teach you this. The world teaches you to speak louder, move faster, win more. It says, dominate the conversation, get ahead, get the upper hand. And that constant noise? It drowns out everything real. Everything subtle. Everything that actually matters. So if you've ever felt like people are wearing masks, if you've ever felt like something's off, but you can't quite see through it, then this video is for you. Because we're not going to force clarity. We're going to invite it, by listening deeper, not looking harder. We're going to explore what Stoic clarity really means, how to calm the storm inside your own mind, and why that inner stillness will make you sharper than any hack or tactic ever could. If this kind of truth resonates with you, if even one part of this shifts the way you see the world or yourself, so if clarity begins not by looking harder, but by listening deeper, then the first step, the foundation of everything, is stillness. There's a simple, powerful, and free way to support what we're doing here. Just hit the subscribe button. That's it. It helps more than you realize. And it allows us to keep exploring the kinds of truths most people never talk about. The things that actually matter. Now, let's get into the heart of it. Because the real ability to read minds doesn't begin by analyzing them. It starts with understanding you. And the first skill, the one that everything else rests upon, is stillness. But not just any stillness. Not the passive kind that numbs or hides. Not the version that disconnects or dissociates. No. This is a living stillness. A state of full awareness. A quiet that sharpens, not dulls. It doesn't freeze you, it awakens you. It's the kind of presence that expands your senses, widens your perception. and clears the static of ego that usually clouds everything. There's no rush. No judgment. No need to interrupt, defend, fix, or prepare some clever comeback. Just presence. Just attention. Just listening. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And that's exactly what this stillness is about. Not through overthinking. Not through endless introspection. But through the disciplined act of not reacting. You see, to truly hear someone, not just hear their words, but feel their experience, your mind can't be racing to reply. It has to be still enough to receive. Have you ever sat across from someone and really felt the rhythm of their voice? Noticed the way their breath subtly shifted when they touched on something painful? Heard the silence just before they revealed something real? Those moments are incredibly rare. And they almost never arrive in perfect sentences. They come wrapped in hesitation. In flickers of discomfort. In the tiniest posture change. A drop in tone. A tightening of the jaw. A glance that lingers too long. But here's the challenge. You'll miss all of it if your mind is somewhere else. And most people do miss it. Not because these signals are buried too deep, but because they're simply too loud inside to notice what's happening outside. We live in a culture of noise. A world that rewards speed. Applauds the instant reaction. Idolizes the quick comeback. But real understanding? Wisdom? It never arrives in a rush, so once you've slowed the noise within, once you've found that rare stillness where reaction is replaced by presence, you begin to experience people in a way that most never will. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But let's be honest. How often do we rush through conversations, not just with others, but with ourselves? We speak, we reply, we nod. But how often do we pause long enough to examine what's underneath someone's words? Their silences? Their hesitations? Stillness, the real kind, not the performative kind, gives you that space. A pause. A sacred, breathing space between what someone says and how you react. And in that space, something subtle but incredibly powerful happens. You stop seeing the person in front of you as a background character in your own life. You begin to see them as they actually are. An entire universe unfolding in real time. With their own timing. Their own logic. Their own pain, history, rhythm, and hope. It's tempting to think we need more information to understand people. More context. More background. More explanation. But more often than not, it's not the words that reveal the truth. It's the quiet. It's the silence that allows space for the real to rise. Not forced. Not pried open. Just invited. Plato once said, "Silence gives consent." But silence also gives something even more important. Clarity. When someone senses that you're not rushing to evaluate them, not trying to label or fix them, they begin to feel safe. And in that safety, they loosen their grip on the mask. Sometimes they drop it, without even realizing. The irony? The more you practice stillness, the more you begin to notice what was always there. The micro-expressions. The subtle shifts in energy. The nervous habits. The pause just a beat too long. You start hearing the stories behind the stories. You begin to feel when someone's words don't match their body. And you don't have to analyze it like a detective. You just sense the dissonance. Why? Because your mind is no longer flooded with your own noise. You've stopped projecting your fears, your fantasies, your insecurities onto them. You're not trying to make them fit into your world. You're finally able to see them in theirs. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And that wisdom doesn't just help you live better. It helps you see clearer. Because once you're anchored in stillness, you begin to catch your own impulses. The urge to interrupt, to judge, to correct, to shift the conversation back to yourself. And in that catching, you grow. So once you catch your own impulses, those unconscious reactions, that urge to respond before you've even heard, something powerful begins to shift. The need to be right. The subtle habit of steering conversations back toward yourself. The quiet compulsion to fill every silence with sound. When you begin to notice those patterns in real time, they start to lose their grip. Suddenly, you're no longer speaking just to keep the air occupied. You're no longer listening just to find your turn. You start to show up differently. More present. More grounded. More aware. And people feel it, deeply. Even if they can't name it, they sense something rare in your presence. There's a kind of reverence in that. Not just respect for the other person, but for the truth that silence can hold. Because here's something we often forget. The absence of noise does not mean the absence of meaning. In fact, the opposite is true. When you stop filling every pause, when you allow space between words, you make room for something deeper to emerge. Something real. Something raw. Something unfiltered and unperformed. And in that space, people begin to reveal themselves. Not to impress you. Not to earn approval. But because, maybe for the first time, they feel safe enough to be real. That's what true stillness offers. It's not passive. It's not empty. It's clear. It's intentional. It's powerful. In a world addicted to noise, distraction, and performance, genuine presence has become almost sacred. And when you offer that presence to someone, you're not just listening to their words. You're listening to what's beneath them. You're watching the story unfold in the spaces between syllables. And that's when real understanding begins. Because the truth is, you can't truly read someone while you're still busy writing your own internal script. If your mind is still rehearsing what you'll say next, still clinging to assumptions, still looking for the moment to turn the spotlight back on yourself, you're not present. You're not seeing what's right in front of you. You're filtering it all through your own lens. That's not perception. That's projection. To truly read someone, you have to drop the story you're telling yourself. Let go of the background narration. Stop waiting for the perfect moment to speak. Stop shaping their words to fit your expectations. Just observe. But what does that actually mean? What exactly are you observing? So what are you really observing? Not just the content of someone's words, but the life that exists between them. I'm talking about the real, physical signals, the subtle, often overlooked details that speak volumes. Even when the mouth says almost nothing. It's not just about what someone says. It's about what's hiding in the pauses. What escapes in the flickers, the hesitations, the tiny slips of truth. The pause before they answer a difficult question. The way their voice softens or drops when something personal arises. The tightening of their jaw when they try to stay composed. The eyes that glance downward when the truth edges too close. These signals aren't hidden. They're not buried beneath layers of mystery. They're right there. Just quiet. And if your own mind is too loud, too busy judging, preparing a response, or clinging to assumptions, you'll miss every single one. We've been taught to focus on words, to listen for logic, to hang on statements. But here's the thing. Words lie. Or more accurately, words often protect. People tend to say what they think they're supposed to say. What will please you? What will keep the peace? What won't get them hurt? But the body? The body doesn't edit itself. The body doesn't know how to lie for long. It can't maintain the performance. There's always a giveaway. Maybe it's in the eyes. That slight tension that says more than an entire sentence. Maybe it's in the hands. Fidgeting, pulling at sleeves, fingers twitching when they're trying to stay calm. Maybe it's a breath. Shallow and quick when they want to seem relaxed. Or maybe it's silence itself. A beat too long. A delay that feels like a storm behind stillness. And when words and body language don't align, trust the body. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." That's not just about discipline or routines. It's about patterns. Emotional patterns. Behavioral signals that show up again and again. If someone repeatedly tenses at the same subject. If their eyes always shift when a certain name is mentioned. If their voice drops whenever they discuss a particular experience. Pay attention. That's not random. That's data. Their body is telling you what their words may never say out loud, so once you learn to trust what the body reveals, to notice the mismatch between words and presence, you start picking up on something even deeper, patterns. A pattern of withdrawal when emotions rise. A tendency to avoid eye contact when vulnerability shows. Laughter that comes a little too fast after something heavy. These aren't one-time glitches. They're signals. Clues that, when noticed consistently, begin to tell the truth behind the story. And the longer you stay quiet, present, and open, the clearer these patterns become. This isn't about treating people like puzzles. It's not about playing therapist or detective. It's about watching, patiently, without agenda, long enough to see what doesn't change. Because when the mask slips, even for a second, you'll see it. A glance, a breath, a silence. And suddenly, something deeper reveals itself. There is a quiet power in not reacting. When you're not rushing to save the moment, not rushing to fix or interpret, your awareness sharpens. You start to feel when something's off. Not because you logically figured it out, but because your attention is fully there. Your senses are attuned. Your projections are silenced. And what's left is pure perception. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow. the parts of ourselves we hide, deny, or bury. And you'll often glimpse someone's shadow not in what they say, but in what they skip, the subjects they breeze past, the pain they laugh off, the emotions they mention with a shrug but never stay with. You've seen this before. When someone says, "I'm fine," but something inside you knows, they're not. That's not imagination. That's perception. And it only becomes available when your mind isn't drowning in your own noise. When you stop projecting your fears onto them. When you stop seeing their discomfort as something you need to fix or absorb. You finally begin to see them clearly. Socrates once said, "To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom." And he was right. Because when you know yourself, you stop confusing someone else's pain with your past. You stop mistaking their silence as rejection. You stop taking their guardedness as an attack. You stop reacting to what your history taught you to expect, and begin responding to what's actually there. That's where the shift happens. Where clarity is born. Not in cleverness. Not in tactics. But in presence. Because reading people isn't something you force. It's something you allow. So no, reading people isn't something you force. It's something you learn to allow. You don't need to figure someone out in a minute. You don't need to break them down, diagnose them, or decode every word. All you have to do is notice. Quiet your inner world. And the outer world will start speaking, loudly, clearly, without needing to raise its voice. Not always in words, but always in truth. Because people can lie with language. They can say "I'm fine" with perfect tone, the right smile, and impeccable timing, while everything in their body is quietly begging you to see something different. Their shoulders fold inward. Not in comfort, but in self-protection. Their laughter comes out on cue. But their eyes stay still, flat, disconnected. They nod at your words. But their body subtly shifts toward the door, already halfway gone. These are not random gestures. They're not quirks. They're signals. Clear ones. If, and only if, you're paying attention. See, the untrained eye listens only to words. The trained one? It listens to the unsaid. The in-between. The unspoken truths that leak through in posture, breath, and nervous energy. Plato once said, "All learning has an emotional base." And that applies here too. Because emotional truth, it can't be faked for long. You can rehearse your lines, but your nervous system always reveals the truth. It trembles, it tightens, it avoids. It shows up when someone's pretending, even if their voice is steady. It reveals itself in the smallest moments. The stiff shoulder, the deep breath, the barely there twitch of a lip. So if you really want to get better at reading people, stop listening only with your ears. Start listening with your attention. Don't just hear what they say. Watch what they show. But here's the twist. Before you can do that with anyone else, you have to do it with yourself. That's where it begins. You have to become the observer of your own reactions. You have to learn the language of your own body. How does your body shift when you're pretending to be okay? What does your face do when you're holding back tears? How does your jaw clench when you're forcing a smile through anger? Do your hands fidget when you feel exposed? Does your breath shallow when you don't feel safe? These aren't random either. These are your tells. Your emotional fingerprints. And once you start seeing those patterns in yourself, not with shame, but with awareness, you'll begin recognizing them in others. Not through effort. Not through analysis. But through familiarity. Because what you've seen in yourself, you'll notice everywhere else. Not as something foreign, but as something deeply human. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that doesn't just apply to your thoughts. It applies to your body, too. All the subtle movements, the fidgets, the tension, the quiet pulling away. The patterns you've repeated for years without even noticing. Those are part of the unconscious, too. Because your body remembers everything. Even when your mind tries to forget. Every time you smiled when you were hurting. Every time you avoided eye contact when you were ashamed. Every time you laughed instead of crying. It all lives in your body. And the same is true for everyone else. Which is why the more honest you become about your own signals, the more tuned in you become to your own physical truth, the easier it is to notice that same language in others. Reading people isn't about psychology tricks. It's not about playing games. It's about presence. It's about paying attention to the things most people are too distracted to notice. The micro patterns, the energetic shifts, the small behaviors that tell a much bigger story. Think about it. When someone you know walks into a room and says they're fine, but you just know they're not. That's not magic. That's not some sixth sense. That's awareness. That's you picking up the misalignment between what they're saying and what their entire presence is showing. And the quieter you are inside, the louder those subtle signals become. But here's the important part. It's not about obsessively overanalyzing every glance, or interpreting every movement like a code. It's about watching for patterns, over time. Because that's where the real story unfolds. Not in one twitch of the mouth. Not in a single crossed arm. But in the way their energy repeats itself when emotion rises. In how they consistently retreat when things get vulnerable. In how they deflect with humor the moment something gets real. That's where the truth lives. Not in moments, but in habits. Socrates taught that an unexamined life is not worth living. And if you're not examining your own signals, your body language, your defense mechanisms, your patterns, then your ability to read others will always be colored by assumption, distorted by bias, or blurred by projection. So where do you begin? You start by watching yourself. Not to judge. Not to shame. But to understand. You begin to study where your tension hides. What makes you look away? When your smile is real, and when it's forced. How you shut down, subtly, when a subject hits too close. Because the more clearly you see your own patterns, the more naturally you'll recognize them in others. Their silence won't confuse you anymore. Their polite smile won't fool you. Their guarded tone won't surprise you. Because you've seen it before. in yourself. So once you've learned to see the patterns in yourself, you begin to see them in others, not with judgment, but with understanding. Because this kind of awareness, real, grounded self-awareness, doesn't just make you sharper. It makes you softer. It makes you more compassionate. When you recognize someone else's mask, you don't try to rip it off. You don't accuse them of hiding. Instead, you understand why it's there. Because you've worn one, too. You know what it's like to smile when your heart is heavy. To nod when you're silently screaming inside. To laugh, not because something's funny, but because silence would reveal too much. That understanding, that calm, patient presence, is what draws people out. Not pressure. Not interrogation. Not clever questions. But your quiet willingness to simply see them as they are, beneath the surface, without trying to fix, label, or perform. Reading people begins with reading yourself. Because the body is always speaking. Yours. Mine. Theirs. The question is, are you learning the language? Not so you can manipulate. Not to gain the upper hand. But to connect. To bridge the space between you and another person. Not with words, but with presence. Because behind every movement, every hesitation, every flicker of energy, there's a story waiting to be seen. And here's the truth. Self-awareness sharpens external awareness. It always starts with you. The more honest you are about your own reactions, your habits, your tone, your emotional patterns, the more effortlessly you'll spot them in others. But if you've never stopped to observe yourself in discomfort, if you don't notice what your body does when you're anxious, or how your voice changes when you're hiding something, then your ability to read others will always be shaky, based on guesswork rather than clarity. And when it comes to human behavior, guessing is dangerous. You might mistake silence for rejection, confidence for arrogance, sadness for distance, withdrawal for disinterest. Because everything you see in others will always be filtered through the parts of yourself you haven't yet faced. So when you're with someone, really with them, slow down. Drop the urge to steer the conversation. Stop trying to fix the flow. Let go of the need to always respond. Instead, pay attention to the space. The space before anyone speaks. The pause between topics. The breath someone takes when the air suddenly shifts. That space, it holds more than we realize. There's energy in it. A story unfolding. Even when no one says a word, you'll feel it. In the way someone subtly turns away at the mention of a name. In the tightness that rises in their shoulders when a subject touches something raw. Sometimes, it's not what's said or even unsaid. It's what lingers in the room that no one wants to name. And you don't have to label it. You don't have to define it, fix it, or even speak to it. All you have to do is notice. Because understanding doesn't begin with conclusions. It begins with feeling. This isn't about reading minds. It's not about using tactics to get into someone's head. It's not manipulation. It's not a trick. It's much simpler. and much harder. It's about being present. Fully. Without distraction. Without trying to get it right. Without waiting for your turn to talk. And presence like that? It's rare. Because most people aren't really there when they talk to you. Their body is present, but their mind is elsewhere. Rehearsing what they'll say next. Scrolling through internal thoughts like a phone screen. Evaluating instead of experiencing. But true presence? It's different. It doesn't chase. It doesn't perform. It doesn't push. It just listens. And that kind of attention changes the room. It doesn't fill space. It doesn't interrupt silence out of discomfort. It allows. It invites. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But for that transformation to happen, both people must actually be present. Not pretending. Not halfway. Not listening while waiting to speak. But really there. Because people don't open up just because you say the right things. They don't feel safe because you ask polished questions. They open up when they sense that your attention is unconditional. They open up when your presence isn't demanding anything. Not an answer. Not a breakthrough. Not even a connection. Just space. And often, it's not your words that make them feel safe. It's your silence. The kind of silence that doesn't pressure. That doesn't probe. That doesn't fill the air with nervous energy. Just quiet, open, allowing. That's what makes people feel they can reveal themselves. If and when they're ready. Because presence doesn't chase answers. It creates a space big enough for the truth to walk in on its own, and when someone does open up, it's rarely because of something brilliant you said. It's because you finally stopped trying to be brilliant at all. Think back. When was the last time someone looked at you? Really looked. With no agenda? No performance. No comparison. No pressure to fix, prove, or impress. Just presence. When they weren't waiting to one-up your story. Or spin your experience into theirs. When they weren't waiting for their turn to speak. But simply stayed with you. That kind of attention is rare, and powerful. And in that moment, didn't you trust them? Not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't try to say. They didn't need to impress you. They didn't push. They didn't chase your truth. They were just there. Still. Steady. Unmoved by the need to control the outcome. And that's the paradox. The less you try to read people, the more you begin to see them. Not because you're analyzing harder, but because you've stopped interfering. You've stopped reaching. Stopped guessing. Stopped trying to fill every gap. And in that space, truth shows up. Not with fireworks. Not with a spotlight. But with a whisper. It whispers through body language. Through the shift in breathing. Through the subtle change in rhythm. Through the pause that lingers when a question touches something unspoken. You don't catch that when you're rushing. You catch it when you're quiet. Because the most revealing things? They're not found in grand confessions or emotional speeches. They live in repetition. in the small, recurring signals that surface again and again. When someone thinks no one's paying attention, how they respond to discomfort, whether they always joke to avoid emotion, whether their posture collapses when asked a vulnerable question, whether their energy retreats the moment you get close. These aren't random quirks. They're patterns. And patterns are the handwriting of truth. Socrates once said, "Wisdom begins in wonder." And when you stop trying to label everything right away, when you sit quietly in that wonder, you begin to see people not as you wish them to be, but as they are. Not every smile is strength. Not every silence is peace. Not every calm exterior is calm inside. Because anyone can hold it together for a moment. But what happens when time stretches? When emotion rises? When no one's watching? Because anyone can hold it together for a moment. Anyone can smile in the silence. Anyone can say the right thing when it's easy. During a calm conversation, it's not hard to offer kindness. To speak the truth when the stakes are low. To stay composed when no real pressure is present. But that doesn't make someone honest, or calm, or kind. It just means, for that one moment, everything was aligned. The test comes when pressure arrives. When discomfort starts breathing down their neck. When the mask gets heavy, and their true habits begin to show. If they start breaking down the moment control slips. If they lie when cornered. Deflect when emotion shows up. Or shrink when someone sees past their surface. That's not an accident. That's not a fluke. That's a pattern. And patterns speak louder than isolated behavior. Because the mind, when pushed, doesn't reveal itself in the words we prepare, but in the rhythms we repeat when we're uncomfortable. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's not just theory. It's truth you can see. If you're willing to be quiet enough to watch it unfold. People live out their unconscious like a script. Over and over. Especially when no one is watching. The way they tense up when asked a personal question. The way they redirect a conversation the moment it gets too close. The way their tone shifts, subtly, when something hits a nerve. The topics they avoid. The ones they never bring up unless forced. That's not coincidence. That's communication. And your job? It's not to judge. Not to jump in and analyze. Not to turn every behavior into a conclusion. Your job is to observe. To witness. To hold space. Because in that witnessing, without agenda, without interruption, something beautiful happens. The truth speaks. Not loudly. Not always clearly. But consistently. And if you're still enough, patient enough, humble enough, you'll begin to understand. Not because you're trying harder, but because you finally stopped trying at all. Thank you for walking through this with me. If this message resonated, leave a comment below with #I see in stillness. And if you'd like more content like this, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and check out the next 2 videos waiting for you on the screen. Because the more we learn to listen without noise, the more clearly we begin to see the truth doesn't need to be forced. It doesn't need to be chased or demanded. It just needs you to be there. Not from a place of control, not from judgment, but from presence. Let the patterns unfold. Let their choices stack up, one by one, over time. One action? It could mean anything. 2? Still open to interpretation. But 3, 4, 5? Now the rhythm starts to form. Now you begin to see the deeper pattern emerge. Not in what they say once, but in what they repeat when the mask slips, when pressure builds, when no one is watching. That's when understanding grows. That's when you begin to see how someone really operates. Not just who they hope to be, but how they actually move through the world. Socrates once warned, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." And that applies to people, too. If you rush to define someone after one meeting, if you pin them down after one reaction, you'll likely miss the truth entirely. Because people are not single snapshots. They're not the sum of one conversation or one good day or one emotional moment. Most of who we are lives beneath the surface. And it takes time, real time, to rise. So let that be okay. Let go of the pressure to figure people out fast. Let yourself observe with patience, not urgency. And maybe, right now, you're wondering, what if I still misread? What if I get it wrong? You will. Sometimes. So will I. So will everyone. We're not designed to be perfect readers of people. We come into every moment with our own stories, our own scars, our own interpretations shaped by the past. But that doesn't mean we're lost. Because the goal isn't perfection. It's presence. The goal is to stay open. To pay attention. To be curious, not suspicious. To let people show you who they are. Not through a single phrase or polished moment, but through what they repeat. Through what stays consistent. Through the energy they carry again and again. Especially when no one's expecting them to perform. That's where the truth lives. Not in certainty, but in attention over time. And if you've made it this far, maybe you've already begun to feel it. The shift. The clarity that comes not from forcing, but from listening without rush. If so, you're already doing it right. So stay steady. Stay soft. And stay willing to see, not just with your eyes, but with your presence, because when you give it enough time, when you finally stop pushing, stop rushing, stop trying to figure someone out like a puzzle, the truth reveals itself. And it doesn't shout. It doesn't show up in neon lights. It comes quietly, like a pattern unfolding across time. Most people don't even realize they're showing you who they are. They're not performing, not confessing. They're just being. And without realizing it, their rhythms speak louder than their words. Because patterns don't lie. They might not be dramatic. They may not be obvious. But they are honest. And when you stop forcing a connection, stop trying to label someone in the first 5 minutes, those patterns begin to emerge naturally. On their own. Without your interference. All you have to do is wait. Let the rhythm speak. And when it does, believe it. Not as a final verdict. Not as something to judge or control. But as a quiet, steady truth. One that's been whispering to you all along. Just waiting for you to notice. Because clarity? It's not about certainty. It's not about fast conclusions. It's not about reading someone like a file. Clarity is about being open. It means stepping into the moment without the need to be right. Without the pressure to define everything on the spot. Without turning every interaction into an instant answer. You don't understand people by locking into your first impression. You understand them by staying curious. Real curiosity is gentle. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't rush to finish someone's sentence or assume it knows the ending. True curiosity listens. It lingers in silence. It hears what isn't said. It notices the space between words. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That kind of understanding doesn't happen through judgment. It happens through observation. Through presence. Through a willingness to ask, what is this moment showing me, not just about them, but about myself, too? So real understanding. The kind that reaches past words into the heart of someone's truth. Begins when we stop reacting. And start exploring. When someone says I'm fine. But every story they share is soaked in disappointment. Don't just hear the summary. Pay attention to the story. When someone tells you, I trust you. But their energy shifts the moment you touch on something real. Don't just take the words at face value. Listen to the change in presence. Feel what happens in the air between you. Because truth doesn't always announce itself. It rarely shows up wearing a clear label. It hides in the contradictions. In the gaps between what's said and what's shown. In the uneasy silences that follow easy words. And contradiction, more often than not, is where the truth quietly lives. Not because people are trying to deceive you. Not because they're playing games. But because people are complex. We are constantly balancing two worlds. Who we are. And who we think we need to be. That's why, if you're only listening for polished consistency, if you're waiting for people to make perfect sense all the time, you'll miss what actually matters. Because the most revealing parts of someone aren't always complete thoughts. They're the unfinished phrases. The hesitations. The sudden shifts in energy. The way their eyes drift. The subtle sigh they didn't mean to let out. Those are the real signals. And to notice them, you don't need more analysis. You need presence. A grounded, unwavering presence. That doesn't get swept away every time someone else's energy shifts. Because the last skill, the one that ties all the others together, is this. Hold your center. If their anger makes you flinch, if their sadness pulls you under, if their silence sends your mind spiraling, you're not reading. You're reacting. And when you're reacting, you lose the signal. You can't see clearly when your own emotions are filling the entire space. You can't witness what's unfolding if you're tangled in your own inner storm. But if you can stay steady, if you can feel their tension without tightening up yourself, if you can sit with their fear without needing to fix it, if you can be near their sadness without drowning in it, then something powerful happens. You become the still pond. The space where their reflection becomes clear. Where their story unfolds, not under pressure, but in safety. You become the place where contradiction doesn't have to hide. Where honesty has room to surface. Where someone can be seen without being solved. And that, more than any technique, more than any clever insight, is what changes everything. Thank you for walking through this journey of presence, perception, and patience. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment with #StillnessSeesClearly and let us know what spoke to you most. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out the next video waiting for you. Because your stillness may be the greatest gift you bring to the world, and when you become that still pond, that calm mirror in a noisy world, something begins to shift. People, without even realizing it, start to show you who they truly are. Not because you pressed them. Not because you figured them out. But because they felt safe. They sensed it. That you weren't trying to control them, fix them, outsmart them, or even read them. You were just there. Open. Steady. Present. And that's when the masks begin to loosen. That's when the rehearsed version of themselves quietly fades, and something more real starts to slip through. Plato once said, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. And that battle? It isn't always loud. It doesn't always show up in tears or breakdowns. Most of the time, it hides. In the spaces people rush past. In the smiles that stretch a little too wide. In the stories that never quite make it to the finish. But when you're calm enough, quiet enough, attentive enough, you begin to notice the details others miss. The tremor in a voice. The glance that lingers a moment too long. The heavy pause between two ordinary sentences. These are the doorways. Not to analyze, but to see. And none of this requires certainty. It doesn't require diagnosis. It doesn't ask for answers. It simply asks for presence. When you hold your center, you become the mirror. Not a mirror that reflects perfectly polished images, but one that reflects back something true. And in that reflection, people begin to see themselves. Not the version they perform for the world. Not the one crafted out of habit or defense. But the version that slips through in quiet, honest moments. That's where real connection begins. Not in knowing everything. Not in speaking perfectly. But in making space for what wants to be seen. Because in the end, the quietest presence often hears the loudest truths. You don't need to chase understanding. You don't need to prove you're insightful or right. You simply create the stillness for understanding to arrive. If this message spoke to something in you, if it touched a part of you that's been longing for clarity, for presence, for peace, there's another video waiting on the screen right now that will take you even deeper. Thank you for being here, for sitting with these thoughts, for being a part of Stoic lifestyle.